All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, something bewildering about our culture war today is how much of it is a mix of old and new. When I was growing up in the 90s, it was actually pretty simple. It was gay marriage, guns, and abortion. Now, obviously, the Supreme Court ended the gay marriage debate in 2015, but guns and abortion are still with us. The crazy thing, though, in 2023 is that the issues of guns and abortion, they didn't go away, but we still have had new entrants to the discourse. Mostly transgenderism, racial identity politics, authoritarian political correctness. The political valence of each of these topics is actually fascinating. Many liberals rightfully point out that they mostly won the original cultural wars of the 70s through the 90s. As evidenced by our most recent midterm elections, the vast majority of Americans are pro-choice. The majority of Americans, including Republicans, have no issue with gay marriage. The public has basically remained the same, if not slightly more liberal, in favor of gun control. On the new fights, though, it's a very different question, and it highlights what I have long identified as the new culture war, a new strain of conservatism I believe is untapped, largely unrepresented in the Republican elected base. I laid it out a few years back on the Joe Rogan podcast, borrowing Matthew Walther's term, barstool conservatism. It's a very simple concept. A new strain of people who call themselves or feel right-wing, are fairly liberal on gay marriage and abortion, but are resolutely opposed to transgenderism, to racial identity politics, and are pretty libertarian whenever it does come to guns. The new strain of conservative is largely secular and is probably best described as socially libertarian combined with a deep hostility to liberal political correctness. The name Barstool Conservative is derived from Dave Portnoy, the founder of Barstool, but it represents just a male audience largely that gravitates towards his content and those like him in our political zeitgeist. I'm laying this all out because it's important to the chart I'm about to show you. How do you interpret it? New data released by Gallup shocked a lot of liberals. It shows in 2023, Americans find themselves more socially conservative than ever before. 38% of Americans, for the first time in years, say they are, quote, very conservative or conservative on social issues. 5% more than in 2022, 8% more than 2021. Meanwhile, a corresponding drop in socially liberal has occurred. Those who identify as very liberal or even liberal on social issues has dropped in 2021 from 34% to 29%. The important thing to understand here is that it's not Republicans getting more socially conservative. It is actually an overall swing amongst every single political and demographic subgroup, from men to women to every racial identity. Those that have gotten the most conservative, however, are very interesting. It's older millennials and Gen X, those who are aged between 30 and 64, who identify as socially conservative now by double-digit margins more than they previously did. The question is important. What the hell does that mean? Because in the very same poll, Americans by a 71% margin, as I said, they support gay marriage. A large majority of Americans say they identify as pro-choice. So how can it be possible that Americans find themselves more socially conservative ever, while also being more liberal than ever on abortion or gay marriage? And the answer, as I said, is that social conservative today now has a very different meaning to a lot of people than in the 1990s. It has to do with the emerging fights about gender and about race than it does have anything to do written in the Bible. Church membership in the US is actually at an all-time low. More importantly, the trend is clear. Even those who grew up religious are not attending religious institutions anymore. Only 20% of Americans attend a religious service weekly. The vast majority of Americans say they only attend seldom or never, with numbering at a full 1/3 of the entire public who don't attend at all. U.S. Christian identification is an all-time low. U.S. non-religious identification is only a full 20%. We are still a more secular country right now than ever before, and it happened incredibly rapidly. My biggest problem with our current culture war is how captured that I find most organizations and institutions who are actually engaged deeply in it by the people whose actually beliefs are deeply unpopular. For example, if you're like me, if transgender ideology targeted towards children drives you crazy, how often do you find yourself agreeing with someone who is talking about it only to then discover that in reality they're a religious zealot who you completely disagree with on almost all other fundamental issues? Or maybe you're sympathetic to adult trans rights. You think the discussion around the issue is a moral panic. And then you find someone engaged in the fight who insists it is moral and righteous for a naked drag performer to shake their genitals in a child's face. To me, the most interesting thing about all the data is how clear the recent push, mostly by the college-educated elite, to police speech around gender and race while pushing their views on it from all of our higher institutions is very clearly backfiring. Americans on old culture war issues are more liberal than ever, but their embrace of the socially conservative label shows that they find our current moment far too liberal for their liking. So what to do with this data? For me, it's actually a roadmap to settlement and a very happy medium. Whichever side wants to emphasize individual liberty for adults will win. That is why Democrats win the abortion message. Secular Americans in particular are repulsed at having their behavior policed largely by a religious ideology that they don't agree with. It is also why cultural leftists are increasingly losing the broader public. The new culture war relies mostly on authoritarian control of speech, whether it be around race or gender, and it relies on that control and propaganda from the commanding heights of cultural power. The more people silently will get fed up. If someone does not give soon, we are going to be truly doomed, though, because we will have a seesaw of power. Republicans could win temporarily on a popular issue, but then they'll enact unpopular legislation. And then the Democrats will do the exact same thing. And the longer that goes on, the more split that we all become. And maybe it's actually designed that way from the very beginning. So anyway, I'm curious what you think.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.